I have a couple of questions. We keep hearing about banks and the money that is available to be lent to the small businesses. And even this week there were numerous reports of a lack of available credit and capital. Can you tell us why you think there is a disconnect between the assertions that credit is available while still small businesses claim they cannot get the credit and the available credit is being slashed? Can you tell us what some of those barriers are and if you're seeing that in your individual industries?
Congressman, I will sort of defer to the rest of the panelists here. In the biotech industry, that, especially at the small business level, is generally not available, so it's all equity financing. But the other businesses here clearly can be benefited by debt financing, so I'll yield to them.
Thank you. From my experience from informal research with banking personnel and physicians, they find it increasingly hard to qualify for any funding. In the past, where having a credit score of 720 or above meant you got a very good rate, now it means the difference between getting a loan at all or not. I've heard of several physicians who've had accounts with banks where they've had $2 or $3 million in savings with that bank or different funds, and where in the past, where the bank would say, when the physician would ask for a line of credit or a letter of credit, the bank it would be a matter of just the procedure of printing out the letter. At this point, now they're saying, no, I don't think we can do that at this time. And there's no rhyme or reason. I'm not an economist, but you know, on the street, this is what people are experiencing.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I actually firsthand have dealt with some of this. In my testimony, I did mention going into multiple banks in the D.C. metro area, with a credit score of above 720. A lot of them have gone. They aren't even looking at our growth rate. They're considering that it's mainly based on, I have to come up with the amount of equity to match the loan that I need. If I was at that position, I probably wouldn't be at that bank in the first place if I had that kind of available equity. So that's the really challenging part for us is. What's really frustrating is when I work with some of these branches, the branch managers are actually very surprised to get turned down. At an average growth of over 168% since I've been the owner per year, to not have that in consideration is very frustrating. And this year, we're even showing a higher growth than that at this point. And still, I could be growing and creating much more jobs. And it's just, so it is frustrating to hear that there is available credit, but I'm not seeing it firsthand. Thank you.
In the franchise context, I think the experience has been that whereas the loan officers over the recent history kind of held the decision-making authority over which loans got made and didn't get made, the pendulum has swung in the direction of the underwriters. And so the underwriting and the loan restrictions that go along with these loans, I think, from our perspective, are driving the decision. And you can't blame the banks, and certainly we don't, for the position they're in between shareholders and regulators saying don't make bad loans, and the business community saying we need access to credit. But for example, the loans that were available to franchises several years ago, 18 months ago, for a relatively more modest equity upfront, 20% equity maybe, or some cases plus or minus, now those loans are available at 50% equity. And so the restrictions are very significant, and they're just not available. And I mentioned to Ranking Member Graves, the other Ranking Member Graves, earlier, that that we had a visit with the CEO of one of our member companies here doing the rounds in the last several months, and his situation is he's got 2,000 franchise licenses sold, contracts signed, franchise fees paid, and those 2,000 franchisees are unable to obtain the financing necessary to open those stores. And this is a well-known franchise system. So even for the well-known, well-established systems, if it's a problem when Wells Fargo and CIT and GE Capital and the others are just completely out of the franchise space, then we're really in a difficult position.
Okay, thank you. Anything you want to say?
Sure. Within the 504 industry, last year our total loan volume was down, 30 or 40%. And even though the bank only has to do 50% of a project with the 504 behind it, they did not even want to pursue that. So that the credit was that tight. Within the last 2 to 3 months, We are seeing where banks are starting to at least entertain doing 504s and doing 50% mortgages along with us, to where, during the month, just a few weeks of October, we've seen an uptick of about 10% from where we were up from last year. So the banks are starting to get a little more comfortable at least doing a 504 with a 50% mortgage. So there's a slight uptick.
That's some good news.
So,
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Mission.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Mr. Ranking Member, for having this hearing on increased access to capital.